Hi, I'm Eleanor Barrow, Membership and Training Officer for LawWorks. I'm going to talk today about advising vulnerable clients. This presentation will provide a brief introduction to working with vulnerable clients, including general principles, some practical tips, safeguarding issues, and signposting. I'm going to start by looking at what we mean by vulnerable clients. Clients can be vulnerable for all sorts of reasons, and all of us are vulnerable at different times in our lives. Bereavement, illness, social or work pressures may render us vulnerable. People seeking legal advice at your clinic may be vulnerable because of certain characteristics, such as mental health issues, physical disabilities, cognitive impairments, or learning disabilities. Alternatively, their vulnerability may be as a result of current life circumstances, such as domestic abuse, stress, insecure housing, substance misuse, communication difficulties, including language barriers, and other factors. In the context of legal advice, it is the person's situation and barriers to accessing legal services that may make them vulnerable. It's important to be prepared for working with different types of clients, but we should avoid labelling people. Some people reject the term vulnerable or don't think of themselves in this way. The focus here is on offering advice in a compassionate way and taking individual circumstances into account. In reality, all clients seeking advice at pro bono clinics could be considered as vulnerable. They're contacting you at a time of great stress. They may be emotionally distressed, and we're asking them to explain personal and upsetting matters with someone they've only just met. Simply being aware of this is the first and most important step. It's not always easy to identify vulnerability. Some signs will be easier to spot than others. You shouldn't assume that your client will tell you about any difficulties. So don't hold back from asking for more information for fear of being intrusive. Many clients will be open about their difficulties if asked and happy to discuss any help that they need. So why do we need to be aware of vulnerable clients? Firstly, so that you can identify client needs. Once you're aware of vulnerability factors, you can help your client to express their wishes and objectives, to overcome any difficulties in understanding relevant advice, to give valid instructions, and to carry through acts and transactions. This is important because your client should be supported to make decisions that they are legally capable of making. You can ensure this by asking yourself the following questions. Does my client have any needs or preferences for communicating with me? Does my client need any help to access our services, for example, to overcome mobility problems or hearing or sight difficulties? Does my client have any needs for how services are provided, such as documents written in clear and simple language or information given verbally? Does my client understand and can act on the information and advice I provide, or might they need support to do this, for example, from an advocacy service or interpreter? The answers to these questions should guide the way that you work with each individual client. So moving on to some general principles for working with vulnerable clients. Firstly, the principle of empowerment and respect. Just because someone is vulnerable, it doesn't mean they're incapable. You should avoid making assumptions, and if you think there is a factor that makes someone vulnerable, you should ask. Find out what they need from you in order to get the help they require. Most people know what works best for them, so follow their lead. Secondly, see the bigger picture. Be aware of the background and context of a client's situation. People may be coming to you after periods of great stress, having tried many sources of support, and you might be the last place they've tried. Remember to see clients as whole people with full lives and not just as a legal problem. Empathy goes a long way. Simple as it sounds, acknowledging how difficult a situation must be for someone helps them know that you understand and that they're not alone. It's not just the advice you give that matters, but the way in which you give it. This can have a huge impact on how someone feels when they walk out of your clinic. Your legal expertise matters immensely, but so does kindness and understanding, so don't underestimate the importance of this. And lastly, be aware of the professional duties within the SRA's standards and regulations regarding providing services to people who are vulnerable. You can find this linked below. Don't panic about this too much, as you're not a solicitor, therefore not regulated by the SRA, but your supervisor has a duty to supervise you in line with these regulations, and it's good to be aware of the principles. So, some things to prepare for to work effectively with vulnerable clients. Firstly, managing paperwork. Most people don't routinely deal with complicated legal correspondence, and this can be extremely overwhelming for clients who are already vulnerable. Be prepared that clients may appear chaotic, they might arrive with unopened letters, or a variety of paperwork that might not directly relate to the issue. People can't always sum up their legal problem in a neat way, so be prepared to listen and help them pull out the information that you need in order to assist them. Next, literacy. Don't assume that everyone has the same level of literacy. Clients may have difficulty with reading and writing, but they might not communicate this with you. It's important that you're aware of your client's level of literacy at the earliest opportunity so that you can make adjustments. If you notice or suspect that literacy might be an issue, don't be afraid to ask if they're comfortable with reading and writing. You can check if they'd like you to read things out for them, or just ask, what's the best way for us to stay in touch? Are letters okay, or is it easier to talk it through? Avoid requesting clients communicate with you in writing where it's difficult for them to do so. And lastly, understanding emotional reactions. Be aware that clients might be angry or frustrated. This may be anger at the situation that they're in, or frustration with the advice or response that you give. Try and remember that the anger is probably not directed at you. Anger is usually the tip of the iceberg with everything else under the surface. Think about where they've been before this. Perhaps they've tried to access support from many places and been turned away. Perhaps they've had to take time off work that they can't really afford to come in and see you. Anger and frustration may be what you're seeing today, but it's not the whole story. Just acknowledge this, try and remain calm and patient, and remind the client what you can do today to help them, and focus on the task at hand. Now we're going to talk about some practical tips for supporting people and making adjustments. Firstly, be clear about your boundaries and remit. As mentioned above, vulnerable people may have a cluster of issues that they need help with, and it's not always easy to separate their legal problem from the impact it might be having on their life in general. You can help by being clear about your remit and being specific about what you're able to do to help today, including how long the appointment will be. i.e., you can give legal advice, but that's the limit of your role. Managing expectations in this way keeps both parties on track, it makes for a more productive meeting, and it reduces levels of frustration all round. Next, ask about accessibility. Clinics should seek to make their services as accessible as possible, including providing information such as advice in a client care letter in large print format or braille, and being able to contact and provide an interpreter, sign language interpreter, or deafblind interpreter where required. Don't make assumptions about client needs, such as assuming that a blind client will want information provided in braille, but ask them about their communication preferences. They'll know best what they need. Next, be flexible. A client might have a carer with them, or they might be working with another agency who they trust, such as an advocate or a support worker. Be willing, within the limits of confidentiality, to enlist the help of a third party. They can be a huge resource to you as they already know the client and they can help explain the situation to you and fill in any gaps. They can also work with the client after the appointment, reminding them what's happened, what the plan is, and what they need to do next. Some clients might require extra time to meet with you. If you can, plan ahead so that you don't have to rush someone who may have difficulty understanding the advice you've given. Use clear language. Use terminology that the client will understand and avoid the use of legal jargon wherever possible. Be conscious of your tone of voice. Speak clearly and at a relaxed pace to avoid bombarding clients with information. Pause to allow them to absorb information and time to respond. Not everyone will ask if they don't understand something, so check regularly to clarify understanding after key points. You can use questions such as, are you happy with everything I've just said? Or is there anything that you'd like me to explain or go over again? Be patient if you have to explain things numerous times or in a different way. And lastly, duress and capacity. You must not accept instructions that you suspect have been given by a client under duress or undue influence. This is a particular challenge when giving advice remotely or online, as it's hard to know if you're speaking to someone privately, so just be aware of this. Discuss an action plan with your supervisor for what to do if you have concerns about a client's capacity to instruct or if you suspect duress. Always seek help and advice if you're not sure. I'm now going to touch on risk of harm and safeguarding. Safeguarding is a standalone topic which we can't cover in detail today, but every clinic and/or university should have its own safeguarding policy and procedures. So if you haven't seen these yet, just ask your supervisor for a copy of any relevant policies and make sure you've read them. Today, we're going to talk briefly about risk of harm to you and risk of harm to your clients. Firstly, managing your own safety. Every clinic should have its own procedures and risk assessments relating to working with clients. Make sure that you know where to access these and are comfortable with their contents. The most important thing is if you at any point don't feel safe in a room with any client, you should feel free to leave. Your supervisor should be on hand to provide support and guidance if you're not sure what to do. Talk to your supervisor ahead of time about how you might manage these types of situations. Although unlikely, it's important to be prepared for dealing with angry or aggressive clients and have a safety plan prepared. As discussed earlier, people may get angry, and this is an understandable reaction, but you should not expect this anger to be directed at you. If a client is being aggressive, threatening, or expressing anger in a way that makes you feel unsafe, you do not have to stay. If it's safe for you to do so, you can tell the client that you want to get a second opinion or that you need to run something by your supervisor to give yourself some space from the situation. On a practical note, if you're meeting someone in person, always think about whether the room is set up in a way that makes you feel safe. If possible, avoid being stuck in a corner, but position yourself closest to the door so you can easily leave quickly if you need. And now, risk of harm to and from the client. You will have covered confidentiality as part of your induction elsewhere, but it's important to remember that there are limits to confidentiality if there is a threat of harm. If a client tells you they're going to harm themselves or someone else, you are duty-bound to share this information. If you need to break confidentiality, it's good practice to let your client know that you're going to do this. You can say something like, what you've told me is a bit concerning, so I'll need to share it with my supervisor so we can talk about what to do next. Your supervisor will support you to take action. And I want to touch on the risk of suicide. This is a huge topic, so please visit the links below for some more detailed guidance on what to do if you're worried about suicide. But I'm going to provide a very brief introduction here with some further resources below. If someone is feeling suicidal, they might feel like they can't cope, like they're a burden to others, or like there's no point in living. If someone expresses any thoughts like these, or you have any other reason to worry that someone may be thinking about suicide, talk to them and ask them how they're feeling. You might feel uncomfortable or not really know what to say, and that's okay, but it's important to take suicidal feelings seriously. If you're not sure if someone's feeling suicidal, you can ask, are you thinking about suicide? Or are you having thoughts of ending your life? These questions may seem direct, but it's better to address the person's feeling directly rather than avoiding the issue. Asking about suicide won't make it more likely to happen, but it will provide the opportunity for someone to get the help they need. If you think someone is in immediate danger, you shouldn't leave them alone, but stay with them until you've accessed some help. This might mean calling an ambulance, contacting their GP or crisis team. You can call NHS 111 if you're not sure who to contact. It's also worth asking your client if there's someone they would like you to call for them, perhaps a support worker or other trusted person who can provide them with ongoing emotional support. Most importantly, you don't need to deal with this alone. All universities will have services which are prepared for dealing with these situations, so discuss with your supervisor how to access these ahead of time should you need to. And always ensure that you make time to debrief after any situations like these. Even if you've handled the situation in the most professional way possible, it's still a very stressful experience. So make sure that you get some fresh air or make a cup of tea and make time to talk it through with your supervisor. For information and guidance about managing your own wellbeing, you can watch the Guide to Student Wellbeing video delivered by Richard Owen of Swansea University as part of this online induction programme. Finally, signposting. There will be many times where clients might benefit from further support which is outside the scope of your advice service, when it's time to say, I can't help you with this, but here's a service that can. It's a good idea to create a list of resources and services that you can signpost people to. This might be a simple list with websites and phone numbers, or a range of leaflets that you keep on hand. Ask your supervisor if you already have such a list, and if not, create one. Some useful starting points for national services are Refuge, Women's Aid and Men's Advice Line for people experiencing domestic abuse, the Mind website for a host of support and resources in relation to mental health, the Samaritans and the Call helpline for support with suicidal feelings. Step Change, the Money Advice Service and your local Citizens Advice all provide support with debt and finance. These national services are all linked below, but you should also look up services and resources in your local area and add these to the list as you discover more. Knowing that you can effectively signpost people to appropriate support means you can focus on doing your job of providing legal advice. I hope this video has given you some confidence to support vulnerable people in the course of your volunteering. Thanks for watching.